All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are jumping right into the high-stakes world of major trauma, a world where every single second can mean the difference between life, disability, and death. Let's dive in.
So just to give you an idea of the sheer scale we're talking about, here's a pretty staggering fact for you. Globally, traumatic injury is responsible for 1.7 times more deaths than malaria, TB, and HIV/AIDS combined. Yeah, you heard that right. This is not some niche problem. It is a full-blown global epidemic that's kind of hiding in plain sight.
And, at the very heart of this epidemic is one brutal, simple reality. Time is the enemy. So this explainer, it's all about that race against the clock. We're going to look at how clinicians have to make these impossible decisions and why their entire approach is dictated by one single critical timeline.
Okay, so first things first, let's really get a handle on the true magnitude of this problem. I mean, what are we actually talking about when we use the word trauma?
Well, the clinical definition is actually pretty simple. Trauma is just an injury caused by a transfer of energy. And that energy could come from anywhere, right? A car crash, a fall from a ladder, an act of violence. It's that sudden, overwhelming force that the human body just wasn't built to take.
So where is all this energy coming from? You might be surprised. A whopping 64% of all trauma deaths, they're caused by things we see literally every day. We're talking about road traffic accidents, falls, and intentional violence. So this isn't about some rare, crazy incident. It's just an inescapable part of modern life.
But here's the thing. Death isn't the only devastating outcome. The human cost for the people who survive it's just immense. Think about this. Roughly 1 in every 3 people who survive a severe injury will be left with life-changing disabilities. They can't go back to their job, their hobbies, their old life. And that impact, it just ripples out, affecting families and entire communities. So the question is, how do medical teams even begin to fight back when that clock is ticking so loudly? Well, it all boils down to one core principle that governs their every single move. Really, the entire philosophy of emergency trauma care, it all comes down to answering this one single question. This question dictates every action, every priority. Because if you get the order wrong, absolutely nothing else you do is going to matter. And this timeline here, it illustrates the answer perfectly. It's what's called the hierarchy of lethality. A blocked airway, that can kill you in minutes. Massive internal bleeding, you've got minutes to hours. A limb that's lost its blood flow, hours to days. See the pattern? The logic is simple, and it's ruthless. Whatever kills first has to be managed first. It's why you never, ever worry about a broken leg when the patient can't breathe.
Now, this logic isn't just a rule of thumb. It's actually formalized in the world-famous ATLS protocol. Think of it as a standardized checklist that directly follows that hierarchy of what kills you fastest. You've got A for airway, B for breathing, C for circulation, and D for disability. That's their neurological status. Clinicians run through this exact sequence every single time to systematically shut down the most immediate threats to life, and always in that exact order.
But okay, here's where things get even trickier. You can't just stand there and wait for a problem to wave a big red flag at you. Because in trauma, if you wait for the obvious signs of a catastrophe, you've probably already lost the fight. You've waited too long. Let me give you a classic example. A patient comes into the ER, they've got a cut on their head from a fall. They're talking, they seem mostly okay. But what the doctors can't see is that inside, a bleed, what's called an extradural hematoma, could be silently growing, slowly putting more and more pressure on the brain. By the time that patient starts showing clear neurological signs, like confusion or weakness, that critical window to save them might have already slammed shut. And this chart really drives home why that proactive approach is so absolutely critical. Look, the amount of time it takes to do the surgery, that's pretty much fixed. If the doctors are proactive, if they scan early based on suspicion, they have this big, healthy window to get in and fix the problem. But if they wait for the obvious signs to appear, that window just shrinks and shrinks until sometimes it disappears completely. So if you can't just rely on what you're seeing right in front of you, how in the world do you uncover these hidden, silent threats? Well, this is where the trauma team puts on their detective hats.
They use a really powerful but simple formula. They look at the mechanism of injury, so exactly what happened to the patient, and they combine that with patient factors, things like their age or their general health. And putting those two together helps them predict the likely injuries. It's all about connecting the dots to find the stuff that isn't immediately obvious.
And here's a perfect example of that detective work in action.
Okay, picture a car crash. The driver's knee smashes into the dashboard. Now, the obvious injury is to the knee, right? But a good trauma detective knows that an incredible amount of force didn't just stop at the knee. No way. That energy traveled all the way up the femur, that's your thigh bone, and it very well could have dislocated the hip. And that is a much, much more serious and totally hidden injury.
All right, so once the team has a good idea of all the injuries, both the obvious and the hidden ones, they face another absolutely huge decision. How much more can this patient's body actually handle? And this is where something called the hit theory comes into play. Think of it like this. The initial trauma, the accident itself, that's the first hit to the patient's body. But a long, complex surgery is also a major trauma to the body. It's a second hit. And for a patient who is already right on the edge, that second hit can be the one that pushes them over. It can be fatal.
So this whole idea leads to two totally different surgical philosophies. On one hand, you have early total care, which basically says, let's fix everything, all at once, right now. But on the other hand, you have damage control orthopedics, or DCO. And DCO says, whoa, hold on, this patient is way too fragile for that. The goal of damage control is to do the absolute bare minimum to keep them alive. Stop the bleeding, maybe put on some temporary splints, and then get them straight to the ICU so their body can recover before you even think about the big definitive surgeries days later.
So, how on earth do they choose between the two? Well, they let the patient's own body make the call. They look for very specific markers of distress. Is the patient cold, what they call hypothermic? Is their blood becoming acidic? Has their blood lost its ability to clot? Each of these is a massive red flag. It's the body basically screaming that it's in a state of shock and that it absolutely cannot handle the second hit of a big surgery. And when they see that, the decision is made for them. They have to go with damage control.
And finally, we have to remember the job is nowhere near done after that so-called golden hour. True, comprehensive trauma care, it extends way, way beyond the emergency room and the operating theater.
You see, the complete picture involves constantly monitoring the patient as they recover, personalizing their treatment plan, and, this is so crucial, using the data that they gather from all these cases. If they start identifying patterns like, say, a whole bunch of serious accidents are all happening at the very same intersection, well, suddenly those clinicians can become advocates for public safety. They can push for changes that might just prevent the next injury from ever happening in the first place. And that leaves us with a final question. We know this is a desperate race against time, but in that race, what if the finish line isn't just about saving one life, but preventing the next injury from ever happening at all?